This is a story I never imagined I'd tell publicly, but after everything that has happened, I need to get it off my chest. The past several weeks have been nothing short of a roller coaster. Maybe someone out there can help me figure out if I'm really the terrible person in all of this. I'm 48 now, and I've experienced a tornado of emotions and experiences over the last decade. It has all come to a climax in the most unexpected ways. It began many years ago when I married Laura, the mother of my daughter Emily. Laura and I were high school sweethearts, and at first our bond appeared impenetrable. We were young, full of dreams, and eager to face the world together. But life has a way of tearing apart even the strongest relationships, and it wasn't long before the flaws in our marriage began to surface. Laura came from a wealthy family, accustomed to a life of luxury, while I grew up in a more modest home. Despite our disagreements, I loved her profoundly and did my best to provide for her in the way she was accustomed to. But no matter how hard I tried, it wasn't enough. The stress of attempting to meet Laura's expectations weighed heavily on me, and our marriage began to falter. Our relationship deteriorated, and we argued more frequently. I noticed that Laura seemed detached, as if her mind was elsewhere. I tried to reach out to figure out what was wrong, but she continually dismissed me, saying that everything was fine. Only later, during the divorce proceedings, did I uncover the tragic reality. Laura had been unfaithful to me several times during our marriage. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. All those evenings I worked late to support our family, all the sacrifices I made to keep our marriage afloat, and she had been betraying me the entire time. Despite the grief and betrayal, my first priority was Emily, our daughter. She was just 11 years old at the time, and I wanted to do everything I could to be there for her. But that hope was dashed during the divorce settlement. Laura was determined to portray me as the villain in our story. She accused me of being emotionally distant, inattentive, and even hinted at possible abuse, all of which were lies. But Laura was convincing, and she was able to turn my entire family against me. My parents, my siblings, they all believed her narrative. They assumed I had done something dreadful to push her to adultery. It felt like I was stranded on an island with no one willing to listen to me. The courtroom battle was ugly, and despite my best efforts, the judge sided with Laura. She was given full custody of Emily, while I was granted limited visitation rights. Laura destroyed even those few opportunities to visit my baby. She frequently forgot about scheduled visits, claiming Emily was unwell or had other commitments. I would volunteer to drive Emily to school or assist her with assignments, but Laura refused to let me play any significant role in her life. My family, who had always been close to Emily, supported Laura and helped her keep my daughter away from me. They were determined to erase me from Emily's life. The years that followed were some of the most agonizing of my life. At first, Emily was hesitant to visit, preferring to stay with her mother. Even though it stung, I tried to understand. After all, children often prefer one parent over the other, right? But soon it became clear that something more sinister was at work. Emily began coming to our appointments with a laundry list of complaints, things I allegedly did or said, which painted me as the villain. I was confused because none of it was true. When I tried to talk to Laura about it, she dismissed my concerns or twisted the conversation to make me look like the one with the problem. I spent years trying to establish a relationship with Emily, but it grew increasingly impossible. Phone calls went unanswered, letters were returned unopened, and my attempts to visit her were met with animosity from Laura and my family. They all seemed intent on erasing me from Emily's life. The worst moment came when Emily was around 13. She bluntly told me she didn't want to see me anymore. She said it with such coldness, as if I meant nothing to her. I was devastated. I knew Laura had been telling her lies, but I couldn't bring myself to drag her through another messy court battle. Emily wanted to stay with her mother, and I knew that separating her from Laura would only make things worse. So reluctantly, I decided to pull back. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. I hoped deep down that one day she'd understand the truth and come back to me. But that didn't happen for a long time. Years later, I gradually moved past that painful chapter of my life. I met Megan, and there was an instant connection between us. Because of my past experiences, we took our time getting to know each other before getting married. Megan had two children of her own, so most of my time was spent with them, building a life together. While I adored my new family, there was always a part of me that wondered about Emily. How was she doing? What had she become? I contacted Laura several times over the years to inquire about her, but I never received a reply. I tried to convince myself that Emily was better off without me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had abandoned her. Then, unexpectedly, Emily reached out to me. She was 20 years old now, and her message was brief but to the point. She said she needed to know more about our family, including why I wasn't there for her. My heart skipped a beat as I read her message. The idea of seeing her after all these years made me nervous, but I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity. I was scared but excited. Perhaps this was the moment I had been waiting for all these years. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe. I was shaking as I waited for her to arrive. When she finally walked in, I barely recognized her. She had matured into a beautiful young woman, but the sadness in her eyes was unmistakable. She had clearly been carrying a lot of pain for years. We sat across from each other, the tension thick between us. Emily didn't waste time getting to the point. She needed answers I knew would be difficult to hear. I took a deep breath and started telling her the truth. I didn't hold back. I told her everything: how her mother and my family had poisoned her against me, how they twisted every scenario to make me look like the villain, and how I had tried so hard to be a part of her life despite everything. I told her about Laura's infidelity and the lies she had told during the divorce. For the next 3 hours, I laid out the facts: court records, text messages, and emails that corroborated my story. I wanted Emily to know the truth about what she had been taught over the years, and that I wasn't the monster she had been led to believe. Emily sat there stunned, absorbing everything. She had grown up believing that I was the one who had abandoned her, that I didn't care enough to be a part of her life. It was overwhelming for her to learn the truth. I could see she was struggling to process it, so I didn't press her to react immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. She asked me why I never fought back, why I didn't do more to stay in her life. That question cut me deep. I had to explain that I didn't want to place her in the middle of a court battle, that I believed stepping back was the best way to protect her. I wanted her to have a good upbringing, even if it meant she would hate me for a while. But the truth was, I regretted not fighting harder. I regretted letting Laura and my family control the narrative. As Emily began to understand what had happened, she became outraged mostly at her mother. She couldn't believe Laura had gone to such lengths to make herself appear as the better parent. Emily realized she needed to take action. She told me she wanted to confront Laura and expose everything to the rest of the family. I was astonished, but also proud of her for standing up for herself. She wasn't the young kid I once knew. She was now a strong, independent woman. Emily was uncertain about how to proceed with our relationship. She had grown accustomed to an absent father, but she wanted to stay in touch and continue talking. Then, 2 days later, I received an unexpected call. Emily had confronted Laura. She challenged her with everything I had told her, and Laura was furious. She accused me of turning Emily against her and ruining their relationship. But what came next shocked me even more. Emily called me again, this time with a plan. She told me she was going to take Laura to court for parental alienation. She wanted to sue for the emotional harm caused by the lies and manipulation over the years. Laura, of course, began bombarding me with angry phone calls and text messages. She demanded I talk Emily out of the lawsuit, and now my family was reaching out too, trying to reconnect and fix things. I'm at a loss. One could say that Emily, at last knowing the truth, feels some relief. But I never intended for things to get this far. Along with Emily, I also have Megan and her children to think about. I'm not sure I can handle this kind of emotional strain again. While Laura and my family should face consequences for their actions, I don't want to bring more suffering or trouble into my life. I've been torn between wanting to protect Emily and not wanting to see her hurt any more than she already has. Emily deserves praise for seeking the truth and standing up for herself, but I worry for her. The legal system is harsh, especially in cases involving families, and I don't want her to suffer. From a distance I've tried to support her, but I'm unsure if I made the right choice in telling her the truth. So here I am asking for advice. Did I do the right thing by telling Emily everything? Did I help her, or did I make things worse? Things have taken a turn. Emily came to our house after the argument with Laura. Her eyes were red from crying, and she unleashed years of pain without holding back. She laid it all out, every bit of agony she had suffered for the past 8 years. Laura may have gained custody, but it was clear she had no idea what it meant to be a mother. Emily described how Laura wasn't even home half the time, leaving her to fend for herself. She told me stories of how Laura would come home drunk, throwing things, screaming, and blaming Emily for everything. As Emily shared these painful stories, my heart broke. The worst part came when Emily told me about two terrifying incidents. The first happened when she was 13. Laura had left her alone for the weekend without food or money. Emily burned her hand badly while trying to cook for herself, and when she called Laura for help, Laura didn't answer. Emily had to go to the hospital on her own, terrified and in pain. The second incident was worse. When Emily was 15, Laura had been on a drinking binge for weeks. One night, she became aggressive and threw a glass at Emily, injuring her leg. Instead of caring for her daughter, Laura yelled at her to clean up the mess. Emily had to go to the hospital again, needing stitches this time. Hearing Emily recount these horrors brought back emotions I hadn't felt in years: anger at Laura for what she had put our daughter through, and sorrow for everything Emily had to endure. But what hit hardest was when Emily apologized to me. She had nothing to apologize for, of course, but she did. She admitted she had pushed me away, believing the lies Laura had fed her. She said she should have seen the truth sooner. Her voice faltered as she told me how much she had missed me over the years. And that in the end is the most painful and beautiful part of this journey. Finally, after all these years, Emily and I are starting to rebuild what was taken from us. As the days passed after Emily's last phone call, my emotions were a whirlwind of confusion, relief. I had never imagined that one day, after so many years of silence, Emily would not only reach out to me but also confront Laura with the truth. When I received the call from her, I never expected it to set off a chain of events that would shake our world to its core. Emily had spent years believing the worst about me. It wasn't just her mother's words that had poisoned her perception. It was the entire family, the extended family, and everyone around her. They all believed the version of me that Laura had carefully crafted, a version of a man who had abandoned his wife and daughter, someone who didn't care enough to fight for them. I was the villain in the story, and I had no idea how to get out of it. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear that I had always been fighting an invisible war, a war that no one could see. I hadn't fought for Emily because I thought it was better for her to be with Laura, even though I knew deep down that Laura wasn't the mother Emily deserved. I had sacrificed everything for the hope that Emily would grow up in peace, thinking that if I just let her go she would be spared from the madness. But now, after everything Emily had been through, I wasn't so sure. I had to confront the reality of my own choices, and the more I faced it, the more I regretted them. The days after Emily confronted Laura were tense. I didn't know what to expect, but I could feel the storm brewing. Laura wasn't the type of person to sit back and take a hit to her image not without retaliating. Sure enough, within hours of Emily's challenge, my phone was bombarded with angry messages from Laura, each one filled with venom and accusations. She blamed me for poisoning Emily's mind, for turning her against her, for making her question everything that had been built over the years. It was the same old script. I had already seen the cracks in her carefully constructed facade, and so had Emily. But as much as I wanted to respond to Laura, I couldn't. I wasn't the one she needed to hear from any more. Emily had finally taken control of her own narrative, and I was proud of her for that. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, that there would be more emotional upheaval ahead, but there was also something else I couldn't ignore: hope. Hope that we could start healing, that we could rebuild the bond we once had. What I didn't expect, though, was the next step Emily took. A few days after her confrontation with Laura, she called me again. Her voice was steadier this time, more determined, but there was still an edge of uncertainty, as if she wasn't sure what would happen next. She told me that she was going to take legal action against Laura for parental alienation. My first reaction was shock. Emily, my daughter, the little girl I had once held in my arms, was now talking about suing her own mother. The idea was both painful and empowering. Emily had been through so much over the years. Her childhood had been stolen from her, twisted into a series of lies and manipulation. But for the first time in a long time, she was standing up for herself, fighting back against the psychological abuse that had haunted her for years. I could hardly believe it when Emily told me that she planned to sue Laura for the emotional damage caused by her manipulation. Laura, after all, had been the one to paint me as the villain in every story, to convince Emily that I had abandoned her, that I didn't care. Now, Emily wanted to hold Laura accountable for what she had done, not just to me, but to her. It was a monumental decision, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at Emily's strength. But at the same time, a part of me feared what it would cost her. Legal battles, especially ones involving family, were never simple. The toll it could take on her, emotionally and mentally, was something I couldn't ignore. I wanted to protect her from further pain, but I also knew that this was something she had to do for herself. She needed to be heard, and this was her way of reclaiming her life. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and more messages from Laura. The emotional toll of all of this was starting to wear me down. It wasn't just Laura's anger, it was the weight of the past 10 years, the years I had spent as an absent father, the years Emily had spent in emotional turmoil, believing the lies. I could feel it in my bones, the exhaustion from fighting battles I never truly understood. But now it seemed the fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was Emily's, and I had to support her in whatever way I could. And then one evening Emily came to our house again. She looked different this time. There was a calmness in her that I hadn't seen before, a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. She wasn't the same young girl who had walked away from me all those years ago. No, she was an adult now, and she was reclaiming the pieces of her life that had been taken from her. She sat down with Megan and me and began to talk, not just about the lawsuit, but about everything she had endured. Her voice cracked at times, but she was determined. She spoke about her years with Laura, the nights of screaming, the constant uncertainty, the neglect, the emotional and physical pain she had suffered. When she spoke about the first incident with her hand, when she was 13, I felt my stomach drop. It had never occurred to me just how bad things had gotten. Emily had burned herself so badly while trying to cook. I had no idea. And then there was the second incident, the night Laura had thrown a glass at Emily during one of her drunken rages. I could hardly believe it. My daughter, a 15-year-old girl, was left bleeding and terrified, and her own mother had just told her to clean up the mess. I listened, my heart breaking with every word. How could a mother do that to her own child? How could Laura allow her daughter to live in such terror and loneliness? I wanted to scream at her, to demand an answer, but I couldn't. I knew deep down that Laura's inability to love Emily was the result of her own deep-seated issues, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. Megan, who had been so supportive of Emily through all of this, took her hand and told her she was loved, that none of this was her fault. The look on Emily's face as Megan spoke to her it was a mixture of disbelief and relief. To hear someone say that, to hear that she wasn't the problem, that she wasn't broken, it was something Emily had never received from her mother. It was in that moment that Emily apologized to me. It was a simple, quiet apology, and it tore me apart. She had nothing to apologize for, not a single thing. She had been a child, a victim of circumstances beyond her control, but here she was offering me an apology for believing the lies her mother had fed her. She told me she had missed me so much over the years, that she often wondered what life would have been like if she had lived with me instead. And when she said that it was as though everything I had been through, everything I had suffered, finally had a purpose, I looked at her, my heart full of love and pain, and told her how much I had missed her too. I told her I had never stopped thinking about her, that I had never stopped loving her, and that she didn't owe me an apology. The tears we both shed were years of hurt, years of separation, all pouring out at once. As we sat together that evening, I realized that this moment, though bittersweet, was the beginning of something new. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be more challenges ahead, especially with Laura and my family. But at least now Emily and I were on the same page. We were finally reconnecting, and the past, while painful, was no longer controlling our future. I don't know what the next few months will bring, or how this legal battle will unfold, but I do know one thing: Emily is no longer a victim. She is standing up for herself, fighting for the truth and for the life she deserved. And as her father, I will be there, supporting her every step of the way. Because no matter what happens, we will rebuild, and we will heal together. As the days unfolded after Emily's emotional revelations and her decision to take legal action, the situation continued to spiral. There were tense moments, conversations, and arguments with my family, all of them centered around one thing: Laura's reputation. My family still couldn't believe the extent of the manipulation and lies that had been woven around Emily's perception of me. They tried to make me doubt myself, tried to convince me that Emily was simply being influenced by the drama of the moment, but I knew in my heart that she had seen the truth that had been buried for so long. Emily and I continued to talk, and I could feel her beginning to heal little by little as she rediscovered pieces of herself that had been obscured by the years of pain. But the road was not without its bumps. One evening I received a phone call from Emily that shook me to my core. She sounded breathless, panicked, and for the first time in years I heard something in her voice I never expected: fear. "Dad." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "It's about Mom." I was out the door in seconds, rushing to her apartment, my mind racing with all sorts of possibilities. What could have happened? What was going on? I feared the worst. When I arrived, Emily was standing outside, pacing, her face pale and tense. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Without a word, she motioned for me to follow her into the apartment. It was eerily quiet inside. I could tell something had shifted, that something monumental had just happened. "Where's Laura?" I asked, my heart pounding. Emily swallowed hard before speaking. "She's gone." The words hit me like a thunderclap. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, not sure if I understood. "Where is she?" Emily nodded toward the bedroom. With a knot forming in my stomach, I followed her to the door. It felt like time was moving in slow motion, each step heavier than the last. I pushed open the door, and there, on the floor, was Laura. Her body was still, unnaturally still. A bottle of pills was spilled across the floor, a few scattered near her outstretched hand. My heart stopped for a second. Emily spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "She." I felt the floor drop beneath me. For a moment I didn't know what to say. How could I respond? This wasn't the ending I had imagined, not in a million years. The woman who had made my life hell, the woman who had poisoned my daughter against me, was now lying there in a state of desperation. It wasn't just the weight of the years of hurt that hit me. It was the sheer disbelief that something like this could happen. I rushed over to Laura, checking her pulse, panicking as I realized she was still breathing, though weakly. "Call an ambulance," I told Emily, my voice shaking. Emily's hands were trembling as she fumbled for her phone, dialing the emergency number. The minutes felt like hours. My mind was spinning, thoughts colliding with one another. For so long I had been consumed with anger and frustration toward Laura. She had wrecked my life, torn my family apart, and kept me from my daughter for so long. But now, seeing her like this, broken, vulnerable, I felt something else entirely. Pity, sorrow, regret. I couldn't even place the emotion. The paramedics arrived, and they took over, rushing Laura to the hospital. Emily and I stood there in a stunned silence, the weight of everything that had happened crashing down on us. We didn't speak much as we followed the ambulance to the hospital. It wasn't until we were sitting in the waiting room that Emily finally spoke. "I don't know what to feel, Dad. I don't even know what to think anymore. I wanted her to pay for what she did to me, to us, but now." I squeezed her hand. "I know, kiddo, I know, but remember, she did this to herself." Emily nodded, but her face was full of confusion, like she was grappling with an internal storm. The next few hours were a blur, with doctors coming in and out, but the only thing that mattered to me in that moment was Emily. The girl I had lost, the girl I had failed, was standing right in front of me, trying to make sense of a world that had been nothing but lies and pain. Eventually, Laura regained consciousness, but she was never the same. The emotional breakdown she had experienced that night marked the beginning of her unraveling. She never fully recovered from that incident, and her relationship with Emily continued to deteriorate. Emily eventually decided to cut ties completely, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. She had lived under the shadow of her mother's chaos for far too long. Years went by, and Emily flourished in ways I never thought possible. She graduated college, started her own family, and even began a career that she was passionate about. Through it all, we remained close. We found peace, and with it forgiveness, though it was a fragile kind of forgiveness, one that took time to grow. Then, one evening, when Emily was visiting us for dinner, she turned to me with a look of quiet resolve. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you, something I've never said before." I paused, setting down my fork. "What is it?" "I've been doing some thinking," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I know we've both been through hell because of Mom, but—" I stared at her, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean? Tell the world what?" "I'm writing a book," she said, her eyes locked on mine, filled with a fierce determination. "About everything, about what happened, about what she did to me, about the lies. I need people to know the truth, not just for me, but for all the people like us who've suffered in silence." It was in that moment that I realized how far Emily had come. The little girl who had been torn apart by lies, who had suffered at the hands of the woman who was supposed to love her, was now standing tall. She was not just reclaiming her life. Her decision took me by surprise. But I was proud of her, proud of the strength she had found in herself. She was no longer a victim. She was a force. And as she left that night, her book still in the works, I couldn't help but think that this was the most unexpected ending of all. After everything, after all the heartache and loss, Emily had found a way to take control, to write her own story. In the end, it wasn't just about forgiveness. It wasn't even about the truth. It was about healing, about Emily, and about us. And the world was going to hear her story, whether they were ready or not.